Nice to meet you.
Welcome. We will get started. My name is Jim Wilson, and I am the Executive Director of CLAGS here at the Graduate Center. And on behalf of CLAGS and on behalf of the English program who's sponsoring this event, I'd like to welcome you all, and in particular thank Carrie Hintz for doing all of the main organizing work. So we appreciate that. Before I introduce our guest of honor, I'd just like to take a few moments to plug some of CLAG's events. We're actually kicking off our spring semester with this event, so we're delighted to welcome you. And in 2 weeks, we will have a screening of The New Black, a film by Yoruba Richin, who is a former Robert Giard Fellowship winner, an award that CLAGS administers. Also, I should let you know that our CLAGS events calendar will be available in the glossy version very soon, but right now we'll have to settle with the Xerox copies, and they are in the back, and we've got a great lineup for the fall. We have speakers, we have former fellowship winners presenting their work, and we will be continuing our Performing Queries series this semester, and that will include a talk with Peggy Shaw, a performance of a play called Unnatural Acts about the Harvard scandal in the 1920s, and Mark Crowley, the playwright of The Boys in the Band, will join us in May for a conversation with some performances from his plays. So without further ado, let me introduce Lance Weldy. And Lance Weldy is Associate Professor of English at Francis Marion University, where he teaches children's and young adult literature. In 1998, he received his BA in Creative Writing from Bob Jones University, and he finished his PhD in English from Texas A&M-Commerce in 2004. He recently co-edited a new collection of scholarly essays about the Chronicles of Narnia, published by Palgrave Macmillan, and he co-edited a special issue on sexualities and children's culture for Children's Literature Quarterly. Currently, he is working on a book proposal tentatively titled Voices from the Fundy Closet, Queer Life at Bob Jones University. Dr. Weldy.
Well, thank you so much for coming tonight. This is a beautiful building, and I have something for you to doodle on if you didn't have anything to begin with, and you can pass it out, pass it around. I don't know if there should be enough copies, but you can look on other people if you need to. It has my my contact information if you have thoughts about this presentation, and we were talking at lunch earlier today. And I think it was a really good idea that Carrie brought up, is that if there are things that you're thinking about that, or if there's places that you're thinking of that, as far as presses or publishing houses that are would be interested in this kind of thing, this is an interesting kind of project because it's trying to reach two different kinds of audiences. And so I'm not going to be speaking the whole 2 hours, probably speak around an hour. And if that's just depending on how the spirit's moving, and then we'll take it from there. And so if there's questions that you have also, or if there's stuff that I'm bringing up, or stuff that I'm glossing over and just getting over quickly, just write down where you think that was, or write down questions or concerns, and you can ask me about that. And so there's a little bit of an overview outline. For those of you who are from fundamentalist cultures, this is not a sermon outline, so please don't freak out. This is not a 3-point sermon that is alliterative, that all begin with the letter C or something like that. So I wouldn't do that to you, but it's just sort of a guidepost. And I did plan to write a little bit, or I wrote for a little bit of a longer talk, but I made some surgical procedures on this this afternoon, so it probably will not go that far. But what I did was I cut out things here and there. So if things aren't making sense, they used to. And so ask me about those things as well. So I'm going to just start off here and make sure I have my clicker and everything, because I will be using colorful pictures to keep you involved. I would like to thank everyone for coming, and this is a really thrilling opportunity and experience for me. And I, want to first of all thank the CLAGS and the Department of English for co-hosting this talk. I think you're doing a wonderful thing here. I really want to send a special thanks to Dr. Carrie Hintz, who has been instrumental in setting this up from day one. Last year we met and talked on a plane coming home from a children's literature conference, and it was then that I told her about my experiences writing a 5-part blog growing up in a fundamentalist household, which included getting and then attending and then getting expelled from Bob Jones University because I was gay. And you can see here up on the screen, this is the blog post. If you just go to bjunity.org and then start looking around there, you should be able to find this under the Who We Are section. But I did a 5-part piece back in October of 2012. So even though I published that piece way back then, it still at times feels a little bit weird expressing verbally or enunciating that I'm gay. And as I understand, this talk is live streamed, and I'm looking at you out there, and it will be uploaded as a video shortly. The traces of the fundamentalist part of me trembles a little bit, probably because that gay part of me was such a fight to deal with, was supposed to be suppressed, was supposed to remain my private struggle until it eventually, sometime in the vague future, would go away. But as I've gotten older, I've experienced firsthand the discursive power of enunciation. Right now, in my young adult literature class, we're reading David Levithan's classic novel, Boy Meets Boy, which you can see here up on the screen. And in preparation for that, my students read Roberta Treitz's discussion of queer discourses in teen literature. Specifically, her analysis of the lesbian novel Deliver Us from Evie felt personal when she says, only once Evie self-identifies as lesbian, only when she proclaims her queerness and enunciates and affirms her identity, does she begin to seem happy. And in a very public way, part of what I'm doing solidifies what I began with the blog back in 2012. And I definitely feel free on this side of fundamentalism. But something that has been a part of your life for 30 plus years is not something that one can divorce from very easily. And this is what I hope to talk with you about tonight, how being a fundamentalist rendered itself an unlikely lens through which to view my being gay. So I'm going to totally play into the stereotype of Kathy Griffin, the gay card. I don't know if you ever watch Kathy Griffin's TV shows, but the very first thing that she says almost every time is, you came on a good night. And I would say that you guys came on a good night tonight as well, because Bob Jones is back in the public eye, at least as far as the New York Times is concerned. I don't know if you picked up on this. February 11th. Never a stranger to controversy, this time BJU made it to the New York Times after the university hired a Christian consulting group called Grace in 2012 to investigate its handling of sexual assaults, and then fired the group recently, just weeks before the final report was supposed to be given. I think Dr. Camille Lewis prefaced, in her preface to her expunged final chapter that didn't make her book, which is called Romancing the Difference, Kenneth Burke, Bob Jones University, and the Rhetoric of Religious Fundamentalism, what she says there really resonates well. She says, BJU has so resisted criticism from the inside and out for so long that they simply perceive private rebukes as compliments and public critiques as embittered jealousy. You're just jealous. Any change they make is only pretense. So afraid of being vulnerable, their frames of acceptance have hardened and are chipping away. And so it seems to me like this whole separatist and invincible ideology is one of the primary queer elements of BJU that I will be talking about more in depth. But before I begin more in depth with what this university is, I have to tell you something. I think it's funny. I don't know if you will. I don't know how all of you are, but I have a one-track mind. And what I mean by that is I have a difficult time multitasking when it comes to working on multiple projects. So 2 weeks ago, I was trying to finalize a chapter for a book I was contributing to, which is an anthology of essays about fame and celebrity in youth culture. I don't know if you recognize what's on the screen, but judging by your audible size of disgust, I think you know what is on the left. So don't judge me, but my chapter is on the phenomenon of Honey Boo Boo. My academic background is in children's literature, and I've really gotten interested in the representation of the sexualized child. So while I was working on that chapter, I also found that I had the Bob Jones University project in this talk in the back of my head, and it was hard to compartmentalize my thoughts for what I want to do. I want to do that. No, I can't. I've got to focus on one thing. But sometimes it was almost like what I was reading could be applied to both projects. So what do Honey Boo Boo and Bob Jones University have in common? Well, on the surface, they look like they have nothing. But part of my focus on Honey Boo Boo was the question of the sexualized child and how we as adults feel compelled to protect children from that system while perpetuating and participating in sexualizing them at the same time. I came across a passage from Peter Coviello's article, The Sexual Child or This American Life. And he discusses our adult and parental desire to cast children as asexual beings. He says, quote, "It's clear then that a belief in a child's sexlessness tells us several comforting stories about ourselves. It suggests an absolute limit to our permissiveness, and more intimately, it suggests that kids belong to us and that they may choose to abandon us as our dictates only when we say so, and only according to the terms we have prescribed. So you're a child, you are asexual as long as I say you are. And when that happens, it'll be because I say you're no longer a child." So right as I read this passage, I wrote in the margins, yes, exclamation point, especially in fundamentalism this happens. I think this is a great place to start the discussion about queer life at Bob Jones University, especially in how it illustrates how the founders and powers that be at BJU intended and constructed the university. Anyone who peruses the BJU student handbook must admit that there is an element of young adult infantilization inherent in the system, in which, as Bob Jones III said in his foreword to the 97-98 student handbook. And I'm going to be referring a lot to the student handbook from 97-98 because that's why I was there, that's what I had access to, and I think there's a lot of interesting things there. But basically, the president at the time said that he wanted students to be like the majority who seek to understand the rules. Understand the rules. And through their submission to authority, learn that growth in godliness can never happen when one is in a state of resistance and antagonism to the authority God has placed over him. In other words, in light of Coviello's claim about instilled asexuality, Bob Jones University expects its students to live a sexless life on campus. It assumes that they belong to the university and that control lasts under the university's terms. If at any time the student child seeks independence, like by listening to rock music or something, he or she is labeled antagonistic and rebellious and would receive punishment. Their desire for spiritual and, by extension, physical control on campus is quite palpable. Throughout my talk, I'd like to keep that metaphor of the infantilized asexual, but perhaps budding heterosexual, grooming you to get married, Bob Jones student in the back of your minds, especially in how the university controls and seeks to control and guide sexless, heteronormative social interaction. Obviously, to the outside observer, which I'm assuming some of you in here have never heard of Bob Jones University before, you might be curious about what it is, where it is, and all that stuff. This prescriptive environment to you may look extremely problematic and becomes even more complicated to any queer student who falls outside the norm. Okay, so before I go on, I want to take an informal survey. How many of you in the room right now have personally been involved with fundamentalism? Okay, it's quite a bit. How many of you have not ever been involved or personally attached to fundamentalism at all? Okay, so it's sort of half and half. I'm really surprised by that. I actually see a couple of people here that I recognize from our organization. I'm really glad that you're here showing up for this. But I asked that because this book is trying to answer two different kinds of questions. And the first question is for insiders. Am I alone? We talked about this at lunch today. Part of what I really want this book to do is to reach LGBT questioning kids in any kind of religious environment to think, to be able to see and identify themselves in what people who have come before them. And I think that that's something I really believe strongly in this project, to let other people know you're not alone. But for outsiders, And if we can get to this in this talk, I'm going to be talking to you about a lot of the rules and a lot of things that happen there. Probably the first thing that's on your mind is, why would anyone in their right mind consent to go there on their own? And so there's two different sort of paths that I think this book I want it to do, and I think that there's some overlap, but I think that these are the two sort of main things that I'd like to cover here. So let me talk about who I am. Like, what kind of ethos or credibility do I have? I'm a second-generation college graduate, but more importantly, I'm a second-generation BJU graduate. And you can see on the left, that's actually the president. He came newly to the throne, I think, in 1971. I think that was his first year, I forget. But that is my mom, who I think is the cutest ever. She had to wear a wig because it was the hippie movement, and they didn't want to look all hippie when they walk on stage. So you had to do something with it, cut it or do whatever. So this is in 1971, and then I graduated in 1998, and I stayed on as a graduate assistant until I was expelled in October of 1999 for being gay. So in short, I lived it in both senses of the queer word. After being expelled, I moved back home and eventually received a master's and PhD in English at State University. So I was able to complete what my goal was. Currently, I specialize in youth literature, and last fall, I began serving as the GSA on campus at Francis Marion University, which is also in South Carolina, but is a public, small regional university on the other end of the state near Myrtle Beach. And I've also been newly elected, a newly appointed board member for BJ Unity, which is a not-for-profit charitable organization incorporated in the state of New York. And you can see from the picture, the last time I was in New York City was in June 2012 for the Pride Parade. And I was really excited. It was my first Pride ever. I'd never done anything like that before. And I believe we walked down Fifth Avenue, so like right in front of here. So it was such an amazing, surreal experience. It was a coming out experience for me in a lot of different ways. And so bjunity.org is the organization that I'm belonging to, and trying to talk to people in the fundamentalist environment from this area specifically. So how did I get from BJU to BJ Unity? I won't be able to tell you all of that, but I will talk a couple of points about that. But I think before I also begin, I need to say that I am not bitter. And if you're from fundamentalist universities, I got kicked out. Do I sound bitter? Do I look bitter? And you can be honest. Do I look a little bitter? You might find this laughable. Like, why would I even have to say this? I'm not bitter. But bitter has become a blanket term in the fundamentalist and BJU apologist circles. They use it to dismiss anyone who questions anything about BJU's actions or policies. And in the Facebook era, this term usually gets ascribed to the disaffected online community. They're the disaffected. I find that a fascinating term anyway. But they think if you're bitter, then you just can't let it go. You can't move on. You had a bad experience, suck it up. Leave, and forget about us, sort of a thing. In my mind, this is a simple rhetorical strategy designed to silence any injustice, similar to the ideology inherent in the infamous 1994 BJU video that recently resurfaced online. In a seminar entitled Scriptural Principles for Counseling the Hurting, Bob Wood, who was the executive vice president at the time, gives his philosophy for how you're supposed to heal from abuse. He says, at one point in the seminar, he says, are you willing to get over it? Are you willing to accept the fact that what has happened, that this has happened and there's nothing you can do about what happened in the past? Are you willing to believe that God forgives and forgets and can clear your conscience and give you the right thoughts? Are you willing to believe that it was the least important part of you that was offended? That least important part of you that he's referring to is the body. And at one point he calls that the throwaway part, which I think is really interesting. In other words, someone might have been wronged or physically abused, but everything's okay because the body is not eternal, so it shouldn't matter as much. Let it go. So when I think of someone bitter, I'm thinking of someone who cannot move forward, who's always living in the past. And for me, I did move on, and I even worked hard into getting back into the good graces of Bob Jones University. So after I got expelled, I went on to school other places, and I fought to get back and to be forgiven. And in fact, I was told that I was prayed for in chapel in 2002 while I was working on my PhD. And some of you are snickering, but that was like a big deal, because if they prayed for you in chapel, it's a good thing. They're not praying for your heart to be changed. They're praying for you because you're a representative of the university in that capacity. So I landed a tenure track position. I really don't have any need to be bitter with any of this stuff. So let me talk a little bit, because some of you probably don't even know where Bob Jones University is. It's a private, non-denominational Protestant university in Greenville, South Carolina. It was established first in Florida, then moved to Tennessee, and it's been in Greenville since 1947. Since its beginnings, it's had its share of controversies. But if the average American has even heard of it, it's probably because of the Supreme Court ruling or of his Bob Jones' third appearance on Larry King Live. Other than that, it's possible some of you have heard about the strict rules or the urban legends about the blue and pink sidewalks on campus. That's an urban legend. It's all right. Some notable people who have attended there include Tim LaHaye, who co-wrote the Left Behind series, so thank you. Also Billy Graham for one long semester before he left. And Rich Merritt, who is in the building right there. That's Rich Merritt right there, second to last row. He wrote his memoir, Secrets of the Gay Marine Porn Star. And then Code of Conduct, and his newest one is Spiritual Probation. And so he has quite an interesting story to tell too. So check out his work. So let me talk a little bit about fundamentalism and Bob Jones, and then get to the queer stuff. What sets it apart is its fundamentalism from other liberal arts religious universities. They consider that a badge of honor. And so, as Mark Dahlhaus noted in his 1996 book, An Island in the Lake of Fire, Bob Jones University, Fundamentalism and the Separatist Movement, fundamentalism in its original use was simply another designation for theological conservatives, those who believed that the Bible was error-free, the error-free Word of God, who accepted the historicity of miracles and the status of Jesus Christ as God incarnate. Dahlhaus argues that BJU was founded as part of a fundamentalist subculture to continue countering liberalism and to have a place to perpetuate this ideology to young people. And he says that separatism can easily be interchangeable with fundamentalism. So this emphasis on separatism is one of the main catalysts for BJU parting ways with Billy Graham and other institutions. But does this word fundamentalism to you or to other people carry that same cachet for BJU in the 21st century? Dr. Camille Lewis, who was associated with Bob Jones from 1990 to 2007, both as a student and faculty member, notes that much has changed in the fundamentalist landscape. Hardly any conservative evangelicals, if any, describe themselves as fundamentalists anymore. That label was gone from the local Greenville, South Carolina pulpits and even the BJU chapel platform. At one point, let's come up with the new word. And he said, biblical preservationist, but it didn't catch on. Virtually none of, this is Camille Lewis talking again, virtually none of my students wanted anything to do with the doctrine of separation. From my vantage point, something had changed, and I didn't think I could publish my dissertation without exploring this rhetorical shift. The question about the fate of fundamentalists is taken from a preface to her last chapter of her book, but she had to take it out because she was critiquing the dean of students, one of the dean of students' books, and that was not going to look good for the university. And so she wound up, through a series of events, leaving the university. But that final chapter has actually been published in the Journal of the Kenneth Burke Society. So I'm going to move on and talk about what is so queer about BJU itself. And when we think about the word queer, because it's integral to my whole discussion, I want to talk about it just for a second. As Michelle Abate and Kenneth Kidd note in their introduction to Over the Rainbow, the word queer, which first emerged in English in the 16th century, means strange, unusual, out of alignment. And as you could probably tell from just a little bit I talked about with the university, their prioritization of separatism, it certainly qualifies BJU as falling under this particular definition of queer. They want to be set apart. It's a source of pride for them. In addition, Dollhouse says, in their zeal to become out and be separate, Bob Jones's not only developed a critique of American religion and society, they also attracted a constituency from other people. Beginning, and this is highlighted a couple of different things here because there's a way that they disseminate and advertise and campaign. How do they get students is the big question. Well, you can see here, beginning with the evangelistic contacts of Bob Jones Sr. and continuing through the work of his son, the spreading of alumni throughout churches, Christian day schools, and on, they have this national support, this national network that I think is really interesting. And I think this passage not only emphasizes the queerness of BJU, but it also demonstrates just how BJU attracted the following. That's how I got there, because I came from those roots and through the church. I don't know if you have this on your list of things, but I'm going pretty quickly through. I'm going to skip these three major subpoints about queer things. I could talk about this, but they didn't want to be accredited for the longest time. The president, even up until 2003, gave his reasons for why we shouldn't do this. Now they're nationally accredited, which is a whole conversation we could have later on. Another thing that they're known for is their interracial dating policy. In 1960, he published a pamphlet, Is Segregation Scriptural? Well, the fact that there were no African Americans allowed to attend at this time probably answers the question that this is presenting there. At my point, when I was there in 97, the student handbook said that there is to be no interracial dating, and students who date outside of their race will be expelled. Students who become partners in interracial marriage will be expelled. Students who are members of affiliated with any group or organization which holds interracial marriage as one of its goals or advocates interracial marriage will be expelled. I never thought about that part. Like if you're even affiliated with an organization, you will be expelled. Okay, so don't do it apparently. All right, so I could go through that. The third subpoint that I could go into, but I'm not going to, is access to the media. If you were a student, you were told expressly, and this is from the handbook as well, that you were not allowed to talk to the press. If the press comes to you, you refer them to the liaison, the public liaison department. This department is in a position to answer questions accurately and to speak officially for the university. So this actually happened to me because in 1997, Bob Jones Jr. died. And I really bought into the celebrity. I was really sad. This is me in a creative writing class or a poetry writing class, and there he is being a little stinker. But this is the university. When he died, it was very, very chaotic on campus. People came from all over the community. There I am in front of his casket. That's a little morbid, but I was torn up. I was really sad. So anyway, after the ceremony, a reporter from Greenville News came up and talked to me. And I thought in the back of my head, I'm not supposed to do this. I'm not supposed to talk to the press. But then I thought, I can't get in trouble for this. Well, I got into the paper at the very last part of a Greenville News from 1997. I said good things so I didn't get in trouble. I think that they could understand that the press was going to be there. It was an unusual situation. But anyway, they really wanted to control. They wanted the control of the dissemination of information to the media, which I think is really, and they still want that control. If you look at their latest handbook, which is accessible online, the 2013-2014 student handbook, they had to come up with some social media rules. Anything you say has to be favorable to them, and if not, you could get in trouble. All right, so those are three things we could go into, but I want to talk about my experience and my Fundy queer experience, and then I'm going to go into talking about my experience at Bob Jones specifically. If you're not familiar with fundamentalism, half of you seem to be in here, which is really cool. They have a lot of standards. They obviously believe the King James, most of them believe the King James Version is the only true word of God. All other translations of the Bible are the work of the devil, or some variation of that. It's meant to be taken literally, so the KJV is inspired, inerrant, infallible, and the supreme and final authority in all things. They also believe homosexuals are perverse, evil perverse. This is from John Shore's blog. Just giving a rundown if you've never heard of fundamentalists before. Who despise God and they should be kept away from society. There is no appreciable moral distinction between homosexuality and bestiality, incest, child molestation, or rape. Okay. Some other Fundy no-nos. I'm not going to read through all these things, but one thing that I would add to this list is no dancing. So if you happen to see a poor white guy trying to dance on the dance floor, he might not be able to dance because he was never allowed to dance or go to school dances or anything like that. That would be on this list as well. You couldn't go to the movies. No drinking alcohol. No cursing. No long hair on men. Those sorts of things. So I lived this for the most part, and I just still don't think I'm bitter. So I'm going to go on here and talk a little bit about one other thing. Okay, so as it's here that I like to put forth my first part of my queer identity, the Fundy queer identity is. As Eve Sedgwick puts early on in her book, Tendencies, she was excited to see how the word queer in the early 90s was being appropriated academically in unexpected ways, along dimensions that can't be subsumed under gender and sexuality at all, the ways that race, ethnicity, post-colonial nationality crisscross with these and other identity constituting and identity fracturing discourses. Indubitably, her mention of discourses that are identity constituting and identity fracturing resonate the most with me, because I found my gay queer self fractured by my Fundy queer self that had constituted my identity because I grew up in the church. So as my story is going to show, my two identities were both very personal and created a debilitating epiphany when both of them converged in a very shameful and public way on campus. Needless to say, there was no culture shock to me. I knew what I was getting into. In 1993, I went on a bus trip from St. Louis to the university as part of a campaign for high schoolers to go and stay on campus and stay in the dorms and go to classes. I actually had a good time, and I filled out a college application while I was there because I knew I wanted to go there. I believed it was the best of both worlds, Christian and academics. Don't laugh. Here I am on my 16th birthday wearing the BJU sweatshirt that I bought while I was on campus when I went down there. I was so academically minded that I participated in the limited early admissions program at BJU the summer between my junior and senior year. So I took 2 classes, History of Civilization and General Psychology. And in the General Psychology class, this is like 20 years ago now. It's really sad. But we talked about sexual behavior in psychology. Dr. Mazak, who got his PhD in New Testament interpretation, talks about sexual behavior and says, Satan doesn't create things, he perverts them. This is my class notes from 1994. So he talks about the Kinsey Report, he talks about Masters and Johnson, and then he talks about homosexuality and sexual orientation. And then down here, you probably can't see it, but I asterisked 2 passages from the Bible, which in fundamentalist, with our language, we call them clobber passages. But you see Romans 1:26 and 1 Corinthians 6:9 were attached there. And he is still of this mindset. If you Google Greg Mazak, he is still believing marriages between a man and a woman. So my gay queer experiences. I haven't really talked about that up to this point, but why don't we begin? I knew I was gay from early on. I knew I was attracted. I explained in more detail on my blog how I was unintentionally excited by a religious comic tract that I read as a child and how I acted on my attractions in junior high. This is actually taken from a Jack Chick tract called Wounded Children, which is supposed to be a cautionary tale for being gay, because you will just wind up going to bars and being dissatisfied with yourself, and you might get the gay cancer, which is what he referred to, and then he puts an asterisk and put AIDS at the bottom of it at the time, because this is the 80s. So I was actually sort of excited about this picture, but it wasn't supposed to make me excited. I'm going to skip this because it's a poem that I wrote about, and I'm running out of time. So why don't we talk about actually getting to campus? I was really excited to go. It sounded like, I don't know why people, would think this is a horrible place to go. I was all excited. I really wanted to be there. I thought it was the best place that I could be. But I had some trouble adjusting, because in the dorms, and this has since changed, but there were bells that told you when to wake up and when to go to bed, or when lights out were. So this is from the dormitory handbook from '97, and there was a rising bell from Monday to Friday by 6:55 a.m., you had to have your feet on the ground. If you lived in one of the beds that was right on the floor, you could just put your feet on the floor and maybe get away with it, depending on your hall leader. So lights out was by 11. There were lots of other interesting things here. But anyway, I really enjoyed my time. It was a relatively small campus. I knew I was expected to have a girlfriend, so I began to wonder how I would find one and find the courage to ask her out. Fortunately, BJU promoted itself as the opportunity place, which I always interpreted as referring to dating opportunities. And so outsiders may be even interested to know that Bob Jones was so obviously pushing us to date that they had a designated social parlor, we called it the dating parlor, in the student mall area, and it required us also required every Greek literary society, which is the BJU version of fraternities and sororities, to have a dating outing. So once a year, your society would have a dating outing where you could go and take that special girl with a group of other couples and be off campus and do something special. You might even be able to hold hands, but that might be pushing it. So they had a social parlor that you could do and not do certain things. Couples may not slouch on the couches. Day students who didn't live on campus are under the same dress and conduct regulations. Couples may study together but should not bring typewriters or printers to the parlor. Okay? Mixed groups may work together on projects. All students must use the main entrance. The stairways to the back entrance was not supposed to be used. All right, so I want to show you some pictures of this place throughout the past couple of decades. So we have from the 50s to present day. You probably can't really see the darker picture, but this was a designated place for you to go and get to know that special person. You could play games. When I was up there just playing games and group activities, there were phones up there that you as a couple could call parents and get to know the parents of the person you were dating as well. That was also something very special. It was all planned, right? If your parents approve, it's all good. I thoroughly enjoyed and actively participated in the literary society that I joined. I actually chose the one that my dad was in because I thought it was going to be really cool. There were specific social events that happened once a year, and it was one of the only instances I knew about where one could actually hold hands. And I was also asked throughout my undergrad years to the occasional dating outing from a female friend, but it never really went anywhere. And there's actually a couple of pictures of me with ladies. It was just the thing to get your picture taken at the outings or the concerts that you would go to. They actually had this thing called Artist Series, which usually happened once a semester and was either some classic play or some opera or special concert production. These were exclusively designed for you to dress up and take that special girl out as if you were on a date. See, I brought flowers. I brought Skittles too, because that was cool to bring candy too. Even though you weren't supposed to bring it into the main theater place, you just sort of snuck it in. So let's see. So in the late 90s, my friends and I were, understanding that the dating environment had changed from the 70s, and so people were going on group dates. And though no one ever really said it, it felt like we were viewing these events as more of a requirement to fulfill rather than, oh, I can't wait to date, sort of a thing. So before I knew it, I was an upperclassman, and I started to hear a faint voice of disappointment in the back of my head. My parents had gotten married right after college. I was nowhere near that. I had no serious prospects. And so the Fundy queer part of me was quite indulged to get a glowing letter. You can't see it, the type is too small. But here I'm being praised by the president for not only receiving no demerits all year, but also being on the dean's list both semesters. So I was actually sort of, indulged by that. The Fundy queer part of me thought that was really cool to get a glowing letter of support from the university. But while I was having no luck with the opposite sex, I was developing a great platonic friendship on campus and was also meeting my physical needs off campus with non-BJU guys. As an upperclassman, I had a car that I could park on campus, which opened up unexpected opportunities off campus. But I never messed around with anyone off campus who was Bob Jones related because I didn't want to make have anything either circle to do with the other person, the other side. Students had actually been shipped, or in that's in BJU terminology for expelled, for attending off-campus stuff. So you'll see here, this is my favorite line, I think, of the whole handbook. It is the business of Bob Jones University to know where its students go and with whom they associate. So if you think about that whole infantilized thing, it's our business to know where you're going. It's like telling your dad where you're going at night, sort of a thing. Therefore, dormitory students must have permission to date off campus. Dating off campus without proper permission may result in expulsion. So, so that was a big no-no to date off campus. I was also well aware, this is why I also didn't really tell people anything, that around Bible conference, which is a week-long series of sermons that you get to, it's our version of spring break. So instead of, yeah, it's so sad now. But instead of spring break, you got a week off of classes to go to see 3 or 4 sermons a day, pretty much. So I was actually more tired after that week was over than, when classes were actually going. But during Bible conference, there would be times where people would get convicted from sermons, and then they would start turning themselves in, and then other people would become collateral damage from that. So they may admit that they'd gone to see a movie at the movie theater or something like that, which is you could be expelled for that sort of a thing. So I kept the gay queer part of me closely guarded. I was not telling anyone anything about me, because I didn't know who I could trust, or if someone were put in a position, they might have to give me up or turn me in to, survival, if they wanted to survive there. So damning information was actually cultural capital on campus. And what I mean by that is that you could really be socially mobile if you knew the right things and told on people at the right time. And so that's sort of like, again, this whole turning in culture was very present, and you would every once in a while hear about someone who was shipped because they found a pregnancy test in their trash can in their dorm room. So that would be enough to imply that there was sexual activity and major no-no, and she's gone, sort of a thing. Let's see, this is, it expects the cooperation of students to enforce the rules. So what happens if you don't tell? What happens if you know someone is pregnant and you don't say anything, and then they find out that you did know after all? Well, they have a rule for that in the handbook. Bob Jones expects the cooperation of students in developing respect for and enforcing the rules of the institution. Any student enrolled for 1 year or more, I guess it's because the handbook is so overwhelming with all the intricate rules, you were going to give a pass if you were just a freshman. But if you were there for longer, and if you know or suspect that another student intends to violate any rule of the school and you don't attempt to check the violation, or who covers another student's wrongdoing by failing to have the matter brought to the attention of the proper authorities, you will be considered disloyal and will be disciplined. And it could be up to any student who encourages or aids another student will be expelled if that other person gets expelled too. So I knew, I'm not going to I don't want to know what you did last weekend. Because if you were at a party unchaperoned and then I know about it, I'm stuck. Because then if they find out I knew, then I'm in trouble as well. I could get expelled or shipped because of that. And there was no way I was ever going to go talk to a dorm counselor about anything, because that would have me red flagged as someone who has spiritual problems, who needs to have a kept eye on, that sort of a thing. Because every dormitory had a dorm counselor who was basically a Bible major, who was a graduate student who was like a year or two older than you, and you were supposed to go to them for spiritual problems, for spiritual help. I think I'm going to go skip over the ideological stuff, and I think this is interesting about accepting corrections. We were always told that God's place was the special place for you, so any actions on their part, you had to take with a smile, sort of a thing. So this is from the handbook, page 16. The most distinctive mark of a Christian young person is his ability to receive correction graciously. Proverbs mentions this as a characteristic of a wise person. The only acceptable response to a correction from anyone is a simple apology or thank you. Rachel, your skirt's a little high. You need to hem that skirt. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't realize that. Or, you're showing a little bit too much there. Thank you. I'm so sorry. So there are ways you're supposed to accept it, especially if it's from a spiritual hierarchy where the people are over you. You're supposed to be really gracious about that. Also, it's really hard to see here, but this is in the back of the dormitory handbook, I think. There's an evaluation form. I never did this before I went to Bob Jones, but I got evaluated by my work supervisors and also my room supervisors, who was in spiritual hierarchy over me. There was a leader in each room. And the first thing they were concerned about was your spiritual life. And you had to make sure that you can see you probably can't see, but there's 4 different subcategories under here. It includes how often one attends church and other ministries, and how often one makes, quote, his spiritual life a priority matter in his life, end quote. So it's no wonder that the ideological messages that BJU instilled, both in the classroom and the chapel, served as a mean to perpetuate this division among myself. I'm not going to tell anyone what I'm really doing. All right, so perhaps ironically, I developed a strong platonic connection with the guy in my literary society who shared many similar interests in music and culture. Andrew Bolden and I were from the same age, from the Midwest. We worked in the same department of the library. And throughout our friendship, we talked about our future goals and desires and how we wanted our weddings to be and all that sort of stuff. But we never talked about being attracted to guys. That was just a no-no. And we were best friends. Suddenly, during the second semester of my senior year in 1998, I received startling news from someone I was very close to on campus. She basically told me that she was hearing unsavory rumors about Andrew and me. And while she didn't tell me to do anything other than be careful, I knew it was coded language, that I should distance myself from Andrew and the negative reputation that I had been unknowingly creating for myself. Looking back, it probably didn't look good that Andrew and I were singing show tunes down the sidewalk together. Probably wasn't a good idea. But I was naive-ish at that point, and there was nothing going on between us. So we were just having a good time in this community. So I began to feel fear and uneasiness, not only because I was not good at confrontation, but also because I was really scared. I thought people might think I'm gay, and that freaked me out. I wasn't fooling myself into thinking that I was Arnold Schwarzenegger masculine. I knew that. I knew I wasn't buff. I knew I wasn't, that uber masculine guy, right? I actually thought I was something more like a safe Dick Van Dyke kind of a person who was musical, who was sensible, he was conservative, he was friendly, and he was non-threateningly straight. So, I could be around girls and I won't try to make a move on you or something. But maybe I was fooling myself even then. Furthermore, I understood that rumors were dangerous to campus. They begat seemingly innocuous conversations with hall leaders and dorm counselors, which in turn could put me on their watch list. And I didn't want that. I was extremely impressionable, and I actually distanced myself from Andrew, and I regret that to this day. It was horrible, but I was doing it to save my own skin because I didn't know what was going to happen if I kept that friendship. I didn't know how it was going to look, or I was going to get called into the dorm supervisor's office and say, what's going on between you two? So I was really upset, and we saw each other a couple times after that. We both graduated. It was awkward. But fortunately, Andrew actually submitted his own blog to bjunity.org, and we actually reconnected over 10 years later. And I actually went to his church and sang with him in Atlanta when he was still living there. So that was the first time we really talked was like a 5-hour phone conversation. What in the world happened to you? And that sort of thing. So it was a great reuniting. So back in '98, I graduated. And I decided to stay on campus because I hadn't really thought about going anywhere else. And I still wasn't married. And that was one of my goals. I needed to be married. I needed to find one. Maybe I could find a graduate student, we could get married and that sort of thing. So while my Fundy queer set aside my endeavors on that, my gay queer side was searching for more information about interactions within the gay world. So there was a Blockbuster movies video store down the road. And I had a TV, as a graduate student, I had a TV and a VCR, and I had one roommate. And it was a lot more freedom. You actually had locks on your doors. as a graduate student. You don't have locks on your doors in undergraduate. So I would check out a lot of gay-themed movies. That was pretty dangerous now that I think about that, just checking out movies from Blockbuster right down the road from the university. So this is one example of a movie that I watched. In the back of my head, I thought, I wasn't really comfortable with any Hollywood representations of gay life. In the back of my head, I thought, I don't want this life. Nothing good can come of it. And just as I cringed at the lack of realistic representations of pastors' families on TV, so I resisted being gay queer because of the lack of self-identification of the gay culture that only seemed to include extremely fit, athletic, maybe vapid, beautiful guys who were more than likely self-destructive or consumed with their own appearances. I know I wasn't mostly that kind of a gay person, but I really hadn't seen any other kind represented in any media. So even though I was meeting guys, I never identified as being gay queer. I remember even writing during this time that I was not going to be gay by the time I reached 30 years old. I'm not going to do it. It's going to happen. By 30, I'm not going to do this. It seemed that I knew this kind of life wasn't for me and that I had no intention of being gay. I didn't realize that it wasn't a choice I could just suppress. I even took my curiosity and went to a gay club in town. That was pretty dangerous for me. And I also broke a very important rule at this time. I actually started physically interacting with another graduate assistant. Male graduate assistant. And I remember the first time those two queer worlds were colliding, it freaked me out. I was physically shaking, because here is someone who knew me, who knew my name, who knew where I lived, who knew what I was, and it was scary. It scared me, sort of a thing. My mental state became even more conflicted when I got a visit from my parents in January of 1999. I didn't realize it was a kind, discreet intervention until I was in their hotel room and they asked about the gay websites I had visited on their computer when I was home over Christmas. And see, I have a theory, just as an aside, I have a theory. There are some tells. I think that there are tells in kids' lives that parents might pick up on. You get caught some way, shape, or form. I had a couple of tells that my parents knew that I was gay, but we just, for whatever reason, chose to deny it because it was easier that way. So it was a gentle confrontation, but I freaked out. I came up with, actually my dad caught me with this movie when I was in high school. I checked it out from the public library. I told him I thought it was the Glenn Miller story. And so, I don't think he bought it, but anyway, so make a long story short, I told them that I hadn't been with any guys yet. I was just jealous of how they looked, which was half true. And so we just sort of dropped it. But then comes the time where one Thursday in early October 99, I went to nearby Furman University to do some research on a paper for class. And while at the computer, I also went to certain gay websites. And it just so happened that a former or current Bob Jones University student was sitting next to me. So he confronted me and told me that he was going to have to turn me in. So he asked me what my name was. What do you think I did? I gave him a fake name. In a panic, I didn't know what else to do. But I knew that things would never be the same for me. So my time at BJU was over. I just knew it. I knew it was done. Needless to say, I had difficulty focusing the rest of the day. I was trying to do, you have those times where you make pacts with God that you'll give up everything if you can stay the same. I was reading through the book of Psalms. I was trying to find all these passages to be of comfort. The next day, Friday, I went to my classes as scheduled, wondering when, not if, wondering when I would get called in. It happened right at the beginning of my 10 a.m. class. I was taking an English class. I received a note from my teacher telling me to go directly to the Dean of Men. At which point, I remembered my senses. It was just all surreal. I was numb, but I remember walking over to campus, to the administration building. What I do remember from the visit is that my visit with the Dean of Men, John Dalton, was punctuated into a morning and an afternoon appointment because of a personal tragedy that his wife was going through. Oddly enough, I thought this would somehow bestow sympathy on me, but I was sadly mistaken. I was told I had to go by Monday. I expressed my desire to stay. I still remember that. I said, I want to stay, but to no avail. In an instant, I had been transformed from a model BJU student employee to someone who was apparently beyond their ability to reform. After the initial shock that this was really happening, the Fundy queer side of me began to think my wounds were from God, that this was a sign that he still wanted me for his purpose, and that I should glory in his tough love. So when I knew I had to explain the news to my sister, which was a whole other story, she actually stopped me from telling the truth. And that sort of, it's not her fault, it's not an excuse, but I had the courage, I was going to tell her, and then she told me, I don't want to know, don't tell me. So that moment of providing clarity was diffused for another 10 years. Unlike most people who are shipped, I was not shadowed by a hall leader for the rest of my time there. I think maybe it was because I was a graduate assistant. Usually if you're an undergraduate and you're told you're expelled, it means that you're going to have someone shadow you for the rest of the time that you're there so you don't do anything stupid or vandalize anything or go crazy. For the next 36 hours, I occupied a bizarre liminal space on campus. I was neither employed nor a registered student, unrecognized by the administration as anything other than reprobate or unclean. Yet, I was still there. And I was attending a soccer game with my sister, like regularly scheduled. Word gradually spread that I was leaving, and friends showed their support, but I don't know what they would have done if I had told them the truth. We'll never know. I had called my mom if I could come home, and she said yes. And that entire drive back up to Illinois, I couldn't stop thinking about the shame that I brought myself and the guilt I felt for abandoning my sister on campus. She was a freshman at the time. I had no clue what to do with myself or to tell my parents when I got back home. My transcripts blatantly read, "Withdrew at request of the administration." Withdrawn. So I felt like this shame indeed was like a spider's web that I'd written about earlier, but I didn't tell you about that. It would never go away now, and indeed the question would come up when I applied for graduate school. But I don't have time to get into that. It's on the blog if you're interested about what I did. So I'm going to stop the narrative for now. I think I've run out of time, but before I turn it over to you for questions, comments, whatever you want to do, I want to say a few closing things. First, a reporter from Charleston, South Carolina interviewed me over the phone 2 weeks ago about the talk I was giving. And when he asked how I'd gotten expelled, and I told him it was because I was turned in, he was surprised because he had just seen the BYU Idaho video. Do you know which one I'm talking about? It made the rounds on Facebook like 2 weeks ago now. I wish I could show it to you, but it's basically referring to watching porn as a spiritual battle, and then it dramatizes a soldier rescuing his fallen soldier friend from behind enemy lines. So basically, this video assumes that all people who watch porn are so obsessed that they can't function. Like you watch it 18 hours a day or something. Near the end of essentially the main argument of the video is that we are not to listen to our friends who say don't get involved or be a tattletale because people struggle and they need our help. So in the video, his roommate doesn't say anything, but then near the end of the video, a concerned friend is shown in front of the administrative office. There is the concerned friend who is witnessing him behind the enemy lines. And I just think it's unintentionally homoerotic. If you see him licking his lips, he like takes a long look, he puts the binoculars down, and then he licks his lip. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? What were the videographer thinking at this point? Like, that's probably... So he looks, and then he licks his lips. And then he gets involved. He goes behind enemy lines. And so basically, then it's back to real world. He's in his room or whatever, and he's trying to convince him to go talk. You can't really see it well here, but at the end of the video, we see the concerned friend is shown in front of the administrative office where we assume the struggling young man will get proper counseling. Because you see the door closed, and the young man is going in with the counselor of sorts. At the very end, well, some people say the video implies, if you have a problem with If you see someone who has a problem with porn, lend a hand, is probably what that's saying. But at the very end, in an unintentionally homoerotic fashion, the wounded soldier gives a thankful look across the room at the guy who helped him. So, I mean, we could go into about how this is really unintentionally funny and comedic and homoerotic, but I really hadn't thought about this, what the reporter said, because the message from BYU Idaho, not BJU Greenville, is that you should do your struggling peer a favor by taking him to the administration for help. I think BJU would like to think that they're that way, and they actually had a week-long sermon, chapel messages in November of 2013, specifically on the topic of homosexuality. And I read through all the transcripts, so they say that there's hope, but they say there's also a struggle. And the very last day was a Q&A, and one speaker mentioned that Christians can have freedom because sin doesn't have dominion over them anymore. As evidence of this, he talked about a guy he was counseling who finally overcame the sin of self-gratification. What does that mean to you, the sin of self-gratification? Well, this is actually a book I bought from the Bob Jones University campus bookstore. It's called It's All About Me, The Problem with Masturbation. So apparently that's a big no-no too. And I guess, he used self-gratification as like an akin to homosexuality. But in the Q&A, they said they answered questions from the students, and one of them was, what do I do if I think I'm gay? What should I do? And actually, he said, if you're struggling, we'd love to help you. Another said, I don't want you to feel the threat that if you say something to me, it's going to go viral, or it's going to kick me out of school or something. We're here to help you grow in Christ-likeness. But he was quick to backtrack and say that this is one of the touchy things where I can't speak on behalf of Bob Jones University. Because he's like, I just gave people a free pass. As the latest handbook says in Appendix F, Bob Jones University believes that any form of sexual immorality, such as adultery, fornication, homosexuality, bisexual conduct, bestiality, incest, pornography, or any attempt to change one's biological sex, is sinful and offensive to God. So obviously this is still on their list of things. I myself was, in the next paragraph down it says that those known to be unrepentant practitioners of sexual sin cannot remain in a Christian assembly. I really wasn't given a chance to enunciate my repentance, and I question their changing that policy anytime soon. So, I know what you're thinking. Why would anyone want to go to Bob Jones University? It's crazy. It's a little crazy. I don't know what you think now that I've told you all this. If someone knew about all the restrictive elements of this environment, who in his or her right mind would willingly attend? That's probably the most common question we get from both BJU loyalists and outsiders. Akin to this question are statements like, if you didn't like it, you should have left. Or, you went willingly and you agreed to abide by the student handbook. And that's where I'd like to transition to my goal in this book project. Because questions like these are what I hope that my book project can help provide the answers for, at least from the queer community. For my book proposal, Voices from the Fundy Closet, Queer Life at Bob Jones University, I've gotten permission from what I believe is a good representative sample of writers who have posted their stories on the BJ Unity blog. Once I get the green light, I would of course like to include more stories. I couldn't fit them all on here, but I got a good sample. But for now, I think that these writers give a good indication of the diverse backgrounds and motivations for attending Bob Jones University. My next step now is to go through the proper channels in submitting a proposal. And like I said at the very beginning, if you'd like to offer suggestions on who would want this sort of a thing, let me know, come talk to me, email me, you have that on the handout, or I can tell you about that. And so on a broader scale, just quickly, I'd like to say, from my some answers people give is that some are forced to attend, some go because they don't really have any other option, some are misinformed, and some go because they're just earnestly and willingly want to go. I know for me, I bought into the idealism, and I believed in this. I believed in the ideas and the system. All right. So finally, as I was deeply entrenched in my research on Honey Boo Boo, I came across an article by Susan Kanabe, who in her essay on the sexualized child briefly referred to the child as a palimpsest. I had to look this word up to fully understand the meaning. You probably have heard this word before. A dictionary definition said that it is a manuscript or piece of writing material on which the original writing has been effaced to make room for later writing, but of which traces remain. From what I understand, this happened in the medieval ages when parchment was scarce or expensive. I thought, wow, that's an amazing metaphor and one I'd like to think more about. But I also think it can relate to this discussion, as I have been describing my identity as both fundy and gay queer. I think this talk for me tonight is serving as a meta-narrative of sorts. And what I mean by that is that by my enunciating my past and embracing my gay queerness, I may not be completely erasing my fundy queer past. As I said before, that's not easily done. But I think I'm making enough space available on my own narrative so that I can start rewriting what I'm comfortable with. And in that sense, I'd like to think that the best is still unwritten, or maybe in this case, rewritten. Thank you. Okay, so thoughts, questions. I got a pen. Yes?
Do you miss it at all?
Do I miss what?
The experience of being on campus, that life, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the community, well, you know, they tell you that your undergraduate years are the best years of your life, right? And it's all downhill from there. Because you have to grow up, you have to pay bills, you have to whatever. There are parts of it that I think about fondly. There are parts about it that I think about ironically, like I think this is funny in an ironic way. There are parts of me, though, that the farther I'm removed from it, the more uncomfortable I get. And thinking, you guys don't want scrutiny. You feel that you're above this. And again, I'm not bitter. And I think I had a lot of good times. I made a lot of good friends and made good connections. Some of them are a little bit uncomfortable in the direction that I'm going with all this and have felt that they've had to separate from me in certain ways. But there are other people I could open it up to who have had a history with Bob Jones that are in this audience today as well, who probably are thinking a couple of different things they might want to add to any of that as well. And I would let you guys jump in if you want to. But I think for me, I have a lot of good memories. That's a good question. Yes?
Where's your family at with you being gay and queer?
My dad just called me the night before I flew out here, and he's not a phone talker, first of all, and he doesn't call. So that was like, my heart started pounding. I came out to my family in Christmas of 2011, and so this is a new thing that we're all sort of struggling with. I just say, for the sake of time, it's still awkward. But they have shown that they love me, and my dad said on the phone, we actually had our first real sort of conversation about why Bob Jones is probably problematic, sort of a thing. And we didn't agree, but at least I could express my opinions and he could listen to them. And, you know, he's not an incorrigible man or anything like that, but it was difficult. My dad's a full-time pastor in the full-time ministry. My mom was the piano player at the church, so we grew up in church. And it's tough. But at the end of the phone call, he said, I still love you. You can still come home. All those sorts of things that were great to hear.
Yes. Thank you for telling your story. I just have a comment. I don't think Bob Jones is any different from being raised in any type of household. I grew up in a strict Catholic, authoritative kind of household. So hearing your story, being told that the lesbianism or being gay is a sin, it's the same concept. And I just wanted to know, how is it that this university just stayed under the radar without any? I know you said there was no media, nothing. How is it that they just stayed under the without anybody coming in and saying, well, this is wrong? Because
if you do, you're gone. They have they had this after my dad was there. My dad was a hall leader, and I said, "Dad, did you have the Speak to Me box when you were on campus?" And he said, "No." And I said, "The Speak to Me box was in the student mall area. And basically, you could write anything you wanted on that card, and the administration would read it, as long as you signed your name to it." So it was designed, I think, in spirit to say, "Hey, what are you guys thinking on campus? Is everything okay? Did you not like that, that meal you just ate at the dining common? Or do you think this, is there room for improvement?" But he actually said, one of his fellow hall leaders wrote a message, or wrote a message to the president and said, "I didn't really agree with something that you said from the chapel platform." And I said, "Well, what happened to him?" And he said, "Well, he was no longer a hall leader, but he could still graduate. So he was demoted from his spiritual position of leadership, but he could still graduate." So you can't, it's a system where anything that you say that might be constructive criticism is not construed that way. It's considered rebellious. So as far as flying under the radar, they like to be separatist in a lot of different ways. It did make national news. Supreme Court, they went all the way to the Supreme Court about the interracial tax exemption sort of a thing. So they've made news every once in a while, but I think they'd like being under the radar in a couple of different ways. I think it benefits them. But it's a culture where you can't really ask those really deep questions, ideological questions, because it's just construed as rebellion. Yes?
I want to talk about the mindset of the true believer of Bob Jones, and thinking about God Loves Uganda. Are you familiar with that one, Reed?
No.
It's a group. It's a missionary center in Middle America, mainly young, maybe 19 to 24, who absolutely believe that they have the right to convert Africa. It's the new colonization of Africa. But what's striking about it is like upward with music. I mean, these kids are so convinced that they are doing the right thing, have no sense of the arrogance of their position or of the history of colonization. And, and I think that Bob Jones is the kind of place where these kids go to school and get programmed. So I'm just wondering, I'm talking about the straight kids.
Okay, yes.
I'm talking about the straight kids. Because hopefully all the gay kids will at some point come to realize that it's a hostile environment. But how do we address detoxing or deprogramming that kind of mindset, which is a privilege? You have God's word on your side. It would also figure with how they deal with homosexuals here and there. But it's just we're seeing so much in Africa now from white missionaries, usually framed as older, but these are young people.
I think that from the fundamentalist perspective, that's been a mission from Bob Jones since day one, of reaching the lost through the gospel, whether that be the African American community or abroad. And so I think from we talk about this in online forums about something they had on Bob Jones campus, they still do, I think, called Mission Prayer Band, where they meet every Monday, I think, after supper, and they pray for different missionaries. So the missionary emphasis, they even had a missionary emphasis week, I believe, once a year. It's very strong on campus. So I think that that's something that you would find on that campus is the reaching the lost wherever you may go. The question that you asked about how to diffuse that, I think it doesn't gel with the ideology of the patriarchal system, the privileged system that, well, people joke. On the Bob Jones University crest, there's a Latin statement that says "Petimus credimus." It translates roughly to "we seek, we believe," or "we trust, we believe." But a lot of people, even before my time there, roughly translated that in a snarky way to mean, it means I'm right and you're wrong. And so basically that's sort of in a nutshell how they operate, in the sense that there are a lot of earnest people on that campus. There are a lot of people who are very earnest and show Christ-like love in a lot of different ways. I think the overall system there is easy to get caught up into because you have something that they use as an authoritative. The Bible is authoritative. And so I don't see that being diffused anytime soon if they're operating the same way that they've always been. They like to say they have a softer image now. The part I didn't read from you is that, this is a family business. Senior, junior, the third, Stephen, who now has stepped down and will apparently be gone by May. So we don't really know where the future leadership lies. But it's a family business. And even though people thought when Stephen stepped up as the president, things were going to change. But it turns out that was just sort of a front, like a facade. We changed a couple of things here and there. Women no longer have to wear pantyhose on front campus. Wow. Women can wear slacks at different places on campus now. So that's a really important question.
Let me ask it a different way. Let's
Yeah.
parse your question. Do you feel that you were brainwashed, and at what point? And I don't want to. This is not an attack upon belief. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just talking about how people are programmed in this authoritarian environment, and at what point you realize that you, perhaps the word is not brainwashed, but you know where I'm going.
There's a cognitive dissonance there where, for me, maybe I've got the easy way out because I'm gay, so I I don't fit. Bye. I don't fit under your construct anymore. So it's easy for me. But if you're someone who is a white male, married, hetero, it's going to be a little bit harder. It happens. Sometimes it takes a scandal. For example, I think it was 2012, right, the Do Right BJU campaign, where the Tina Anderson scandal from, was it 97 or something like that, was being brought to light. Basically, she was raped and then sent off to another state to have the baby in a hushed way. But when it came to light, some of the straight hetero males were like, that's not right. And it's happening again. It is happening again. We witnessed it 2 weeks ago on the Facebook's blogosphere on their own page. Because if you know anything about the university, they police everything about them that they control. You can't write any dissenting thing on their webpage or it will be gone. But what happened 2 weeks ago from that New York Times thing, the Grace scandal, when they fired Grace 2 weeks before, however long it was before the report, people who were the defenders started coming out and saying, that's not right. That looks really bad. Why would you, for 2 weeks before that thing came out, why would you fire the people who are doing an outside investigative report that you hired, sort of a thing? So there are ways that can come out for certain people. The brainwash thing, we hear a lot. Were you in a cult? That word gets thrown around a lot. I wouldn't go that far. But the farther I'm away from that life, when every classroom building has a saying from the founder, the celebrity culture is really interesting with all that. So I would say for some people, the cognitive dissonance happens through scandal. For some people like me, it helps if you're part of that Appendix F, you're in the no-no list sort of a thing. So I hope that helps. Angela, you had your hand up and then you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say that with that anti-gay environment there, did you at any point consider, well, this is not for me, I'm going someplace else where I am accepted?
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
The thing is, I didn't identify. That's that cognitive dissonance where you can compartmentalize and bifurcate two different parts of your life. For me, it was working pretty well as an undergraduate because I didn't tell people where I was going on such and such a time because of the culture that I was aware of. And so because I didn't identify that way, I thought, and I got through this point, I just kept on thinking, I'm not gay and I'm not going to be gay by the time I'm 30 if I am, sort of a thing. So for me, I didn't even register as gay. So I was earnest and I loved the system. I believed in the system. I believe there are a lot of great things about it. So for me, it wasn't. Yeah, in the back.
Well, so I hear that your experience of oppression is really tied to this particular institution. And I feel like there's actually a much more pervasive implication of fundamentalism in our country, in our politics, when we hear people saying, you know, if a woman is raped and she becomes pregnant, that must have been God's will for her to have this child. And I wonder if you feel like you can extrapolate from your experience to a broader hegemonic Christian project that still exists, and whether you feel like you have reconciled Christianity with your identity, or whether you think that there are larger problems within a broader system.
Those are all good points, and I think that once I can get this, sort of established, Camille Lewis, who I quoted several times, is an American religious scholar and is all up in doing research on the university itself. So again, that's more focalized than the broader fundamentalist spectrum, because that again is. Because the very basis of fundamentalism is separating, they separate from within themselves too. So Bob Jones separated from Bill Rice and the Moody Institute and all this sort of stuff. So that would be really hard to then say they're all in one camp, because they don't want to be in any all one camp. But I think it's a good point. I showed that one clip about one of the problem things that I think goes beyond Bob Jones is the way to counsel victims. There's the nouthetic counseling, which is, just if you had problems, just go from the Bible. That's all you need. It's our standard authority. And so I think to answer your question, I think that's a worthy topic. And I think I would love to do something down the line with that connects with this or expands on this, because I think that, the queerness or the coming in from that point of like, this is weird, this is crazy, why did I even do this? There's lots of other people that are, straight or heteronormative who could also stand up and give their stories. And like my story is just one story from the queer community too, which is why I think I want a lot of people say, because I don't represent everyone. But
well, and my experiences are obviously very different from yours, and I did not go to a university like that. But I find that I feel that there are like sort of two camps, right? People who were fundamentalists and come out and are totally anti-religion, and people who come out and want to synthesize. And I think it's hard that there's not a lot of communication between those camps, within the queer community.
Well, and I think Jeffrey Hoffman, who's here, is the executive director of bjunity.org, and Safety Net just launched, right? If you wanted to tell people what Safety Net was, because that might be something.
Safety Net is an umbrella organization that you may have heard of organizations like One Wheaton and, of course, BJ Unity, and other Christian colleges who have somewhat large LGBT alumni populations that have emerged over the last few years to support students and alumni from LGBT, particularly students and alumni from those colleges. It's an interesting question that you ask, and I can address it a little bit. I think I deal with a lot of Christian college alumni because of the work that I do. I am myself Christian, but I'm not an evangelical Christian, and I work in the Episcopal Church, which is a very affirming denomination, and that's actually what saved my faith for me personally. But I work with a lot of Christian college alumni, not just from Bob Jones University, but from what we at Bob Jones would have considered to be liberal Christian schools around the country. And the overwhelming experience that I have is that probably 50% of the alumni of Christian colleges that I know identify as either atheist or agnostic, which asks a larger question, I think, as to what the purpose of those schools is and is it actually being met. And that's not just the LGBT alumni, I'm talking about Christian college alumni in general. I know more people of faith who've gone to state schools than I do, or secular colleges than I do people who've come through the Christian college system. But Safety Net is actually an umbrella organization where we're hoping to help to the embryonic organizations that are happening. I mean, this is it's an organic movement that's happening, and of course I have my own metaphysical reasons for why it's happening, but there's a metaphysical emergence in the last 5 years or so of these LGBT groups just spontaneously springing up among alumni. And BJ Unity's genesis was very much an organic Facebook kind of phenomenon. And yet, immediately we tapped into this larger network and we realized that there's a tremendous need. Almost every day I get an email at bjunity.org from a young person at a Christian college somewhere saying, I want to start a GSA. I want to start, or I just recently graduated, I want to help the gay kids that I know that are on campus. How can you help me help them? And so Safety Net, which I'm on the board of, just launched last week in California, Los Angeles, and that is sort of to address an umbrella kind of, and also the word I'm looking for is not in my head, but an incubator basically for those kinds of things. And it's a growing movement.
But BJ Unity itself is not a religious organization or company. So like
none of these organizations is, and Safety Net is not either. We support everyone with a common experience.
Yes.
How has your faith changed from?
I avoided the question because, and this is piggybacking on my dad's call 2 nights ago. Do you still go to church? Do you go to church anywhere? Well, not for a while. When's the last time you read your Bible all the way through? Not for a while. When's the last time you read the New Testament all the way through? Not for a while. And he said, well, there's more than just Baptist churches out there you can go to. There's Methodist. Did he say there's Reformed Presbyterian? I could go there. I grew. Yeah, like, and it's part of me, like the funny part of me feels really guilty, but like this.
Right?
Yeah. Part of it's guilt that you grow up with. I did that. I grew up in the church. I went 3 times a week. I had a great time. I think it builds great community. For me, I'm just taking some time off, and I still identify as a believer, but a stagnant believer.
Has it been since you were expelled, or sort of since leaving that world, it just kind of...
Now you sound like a dorm counselor. When's the last time you read your Bible? When's the last time you started talking with God? Maybe you need to get back into that. When I was expelled and I went back home, I lived as a monastic life as I could in central Illinois. There was no outlets to find entertainment. And I had a great time. I lived with my parents. I couldn't do that again. They were great to take me in. They didn't have to do that. But they worked at the church. So I was there. I was a Sunday school teacher. I played the organ. I was heavily involved. When I left home and went to other schools, I tried to make efforts, but then it would sort of like dwindle off. Because I was into my studies and I would make an effort each time I'd move, and then it would just sort of filter off, and would feel guilty and then not do it. So, yeah.
So it seems like, and I've seen some of this in different places in the country, where you see these groups that are emerging now, and it seems like these businesses, these schools, family businesses or what have you, like the funding, is it dwindling? I mean, are they going through a funding crisis because they're being, as I would think, just absolutely ridiculous?
A couple of things. They're now nationally accredited. I did not know there was such a difference between national and regional accreditation until the Facebook world informed me about this.
What is the difference?
National, for their perspective, is like a religious sort of it's not, I'm probably butchering all this, but the hierarchy it's not on the same level as regional, but it makes them feel good and they can receive federal funding. But there was such an anti-accreditation rhetoric from almost the beginning that it's just sort of interesting how they flipped, and now we can, and there's rumors that they're trying to get regional, but that will never happen in my academic opinion. Your other question was about numbers, and some of you probably know the numbers better than I. Like, Eddie, back when you were there was probably how many undergraduates?
Back in the dark ages?
when I gave tours, we were told to quote 6,000 students, and I think they,
Inflated that?
no, it
No?
was probably that much the dorms were full. Now we know dorms are not full, and they're counting every single possible person to try to get to 3,000. So
I-
20 years it's dropped in half.
I asked you because you were there at probably the pinnacle. Like, did they have the Show My People, or was that
Show
before?
my people.
Okay,
The flyers, the TV shows, the traveling groups.
So it was their version of like televangelism, pretty much. That they had their own TV show. So that was probably at the apex or the height of the popularity.
And to your point, when Jerry Falwell went down the slide at PTL, when PTL fell apart, they were so appalled at that they had to separate, and not just separate, they shut their TV show down in 1 week because they didn't want to be associated with Jerry Falwell and all of that, and they literally shut the magazine, TV show, a couple of other things went dark that quickly because, to your earlier point about separation, Jerry Falwell was evil, PTL was evil. We cannot be associated in the world like them, and people are going to think we are because we have a TV show.
And so now the numbers are dropping to, I don't know, what's a 2,500? Is that a safe estimate? Somewhere around there. So the funding has dropped, but they're getting federal monies now. But
Are they able to still have their segregation policy?
I didn't really explain all that. Rich probably could explain that way better than I. But they did away with the. They started first letting in African Americans who were married because they couldn't intermarry with the students because that would be horrible. Then they started single, and then they did away, well, according to the Larry King Live from 2000, the interracial dating ban was lifted like magically. We were not expecting it. I was at home. I had already been expelled at that point. I watched it from home. Bob Jones is on Larry King Live. Gotta watch. And it was after George Bush was going through the presidential campaign, and he spoke at Bob Jones, and then people started to scrutinize Bob Jones. So you mentioned earlier, how do they stay under the radar? Well, sometimes they creep back up. When the president, and back to the 80s, presidential candidates would come and speak all the time. I don't think anyone's come since 2000. And so because of that, they scrutinized the interracial ban, and then he came on and magically did away with it. Much to, I don't know.
Except you have to get your parents' permission to date.
Oh, I forgot about
That's how
that.
they lifted the standard.
But they can get federal funding. It just seems wow. It's crazy.
Yes, Gary.
In terms of, you're talking about the book project, but I was also wondering whether you were thinking potentially about a documentary project, because you had spoken at lunch about your desire to reach an audience outside of the usual academic circles. And I was thinking how best to get this out, and I was wondering whether film...
When we were, this is also interesting. I was out to my family by the time I marched in the Pride Parade, but I wasn't out on Facebook. That sounds really funny and stupid, but it was in June, right? So I hadn't really come out with my blog until October, and that was like October 1st, I'm out. So it was funny because the documentary crew was there to get our signed, waiver release form for something. I was like, should I do this? But I'm like, I'm in New York with like millions of people or whatever. It'll be fine. But there was some, I forget who it was, who they were affiliated with.
Marky Hancock, who's a member of One Wheaton, is actually working on a documentary about the emerging movement. That's who was there. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That would be something I think would be really interesting, for sure. I hadn't thought even that far ahead, but I think that would be interesting. Yes.
I think
Go ahead.
In reference to the book project, I think it's a very good idea because the outside individuals who don't necessarily haven't grown up in the fundamentalist context, one of the things that's very powerful is growing up, I used to go down south to Greer, South Carolina.
Greer, okay.
So I'm like, we go around and we go past, but that was the whole racial schizophrenic of a Southern. You have to be Southern to understand the kind of whatever goes on down there, and that was amazing as I grew up. But coming in contact, one of my best friends, one of my longest, dearest friends, 20 years old, grew up in a very fundamentalist family, and I'm from a total different world. But your book helps people who don't understand that. And he has helped me to really see a world that he grew up in. Because if you love somebody, you love somebody. In as a friendship, but you're conflicted by why do you go through that pain? You know, and it's not a statement of, it's more of a rhetorical, because I mean, I'm talking about crushing pain that would have me in tears, that, you know, not any of us who are experienced or openly gay, you can have these things, doesn't necessarily have to deal with the religion, but sometimes the type of schizophrenic, like love, and we represent the Christ, and the pain you can give to someone in your family is so horrible. And I have to step back and go, what is it that keeps you going? And I'm talking about people I've seen that literally, you know, some of them are not here from that pain, but you're able to talk about that from a place, and that's necessary for some of us who are outside of it, you know, so that's important. And of course, a lot of different, because folks are in a Christian context, and I'm more sensitive now, is that it's a container, and if you only know that container, it's not your fault. You know, and I'm not saying that, you know, you grow up, your family, everybody you know, everybody, it's just hard. What do you do? You know, and what I've learned from my friend, you know, everybody. And it's taken I call him the king of Job, because he has had the patience to allow his family to develop. So I hear that when your father says, and I can understand hearing that from your father, that's a lot.
It is.
Mean, my friends, his father's still talking about, well, you know, if you meet a nice woman, 25 years, Dad. Come on, you know.
You said a lot of really powerful things there. The religious shunning, I think that happens for anyone who, gay or straight, leaves the university, the family, the bubble. You can face immediate the ramifications of that. You could be shut down, cut off from everyone because the university says so. And that just sounds really crazy when you say it out loud. But if you can use verses as proof text, if you can find a Bible verse that some way can reinforce that decision that everyone needs to make about being separate from the world or abstain from all appearances of evil, that's a really good one. You can pretty much do a lot of pain and a lot of hurt. And I was interpreting what you said at first, like, why would you stay in that kind of pain? I was thinking, well, the guilt is probably fundamental to the sermons, because everyone is sinful, as we're taught, and so everyone can have something that they can improve upon. And so everyone should feel convicted at some point. But there was no way I was ever going to go forward at one of those altar calls at church, or at Bob Jones. And they would have, at the beginning of every semester, they'd have evangelistic services where you could then confess what you've done at home or whatever. I'm not going to do that. I've already told you the cultural environment. I am not telling anyone anything about what I did, because I don't trust people with it. But thank you for that.
It's
I think
a
that's
good learn. It's because we can't, you know, just to love my best friend, and to see the pain, and it's something that it's not a part of my context. I mean, I grew up in New York City, and it's like New York and LA. You're just like, what do you do?
It is.
You know, it's just a whole different world.
Yeah.
But this person is brilliant, and you know, you just say, well, how does this family do this?
It's a subculture, and I was telling Carrie this at lunch today. One of my good friends in Florence right now has had a revolutionary year and a half or so, because he was married and his family was in town, but then he came out, and he lives with his boyfriend now. And so we're talking to the boyfriend, we're talking about things, and the boyfriend is there, and he did, what are you talking about? And then telling an outsider to try to explain the subculture was fun practice, actually. I was like, okay, we need to do this more, because what don't you understand about what I just said? You couldn't go to movies? What's wrong with that? You couldn't listen to Christian contemporary music? What's wrong with Petra? What's wrong with DC Talk? What's wrong with any of that?
Well, my friend's nieces and nephews, they must be around 8, 9, and I've met all, you know, I'm a part of the family. But Michael Jackson died, they didn't know who it was.
Oh,
They
okay.
did not know who Michael Jackson was because the family, I mean, that's, and it was like, you know, and then the oldest daughter now, one of the nieces is like, well, she's getting a little older and they gotta send her off to, you know, dance theater Harlem, and they're like, what do we do?
And that's something too about the bubble. It's like I tell people at my university now, you got to understand, I don't know these things because I was in the bubble. Like my life, I don't know 80s songs because I was under my parents' auspices then, and they heavily policed the radio. I can tell you religious songs. And then once I started getting independent, like around the late 90s, mid 90s, I could drive. I would have that radio station on the popular stations and learned to turn it back to the, you know, the religious station. Because you don't, like, you're in a bubble. And so I tell people, you guys, you don't understand, I don't know how to dance. I don't know what this is. What do you guys do? I don't know this song. Who are you talking about? So
You missed the 80s.
I missed the 80s. Sorry. I did. Yeah.
First, I just want to thank you for coming in, you know, in your own time and process. I think it's really, I mean, was very moved by the compassion that was in this conversation right here. It's just, but I want to just suggest to you, without crying, that you also tell us a little more personally about what coming out means. I'm not asking for you to do that now. I'm just saying, you know, did you date? Who did you desire? What about that friend that you went to see? What kind of conversation took place? You know, when we are compartmentalized and our sexuality is separated from our humanity, it's very hard to break that. And a lot of gay people, not just religiously oppressed, if I may use those words, gay people, have the same struggle of bringing out, you know, that part of them, that sexual erotic desire, without it being pornographic, without it being dirty talk, without it being that. And that's what was missing for me in your, and this is feedback, this is not criticism, and in your own time and place, I think you become more human and more whole when you share that with
And that's the part, the enunciation, the power of enunciation. I talked about that at the very beginning. Obviously, I was rushing through because I didn't want to keep you like an hour and a half or, you know, whatever this is. So this was heavily cut up. But I did say, like, this is like a step, right? Saying I'm gay and being on live stream or whatever. Talking about hooking up on live stream, I had, where is it? I actually glossed over a part here where I did have like this personal moments in that same notebook from '94. I wrote a poem about the guilt, and I used the metaphor of a spider web because that's been in the back of my head for a long time. Like, this is something dangerous that I'm stuck in, or I could get stuck in. So I was like, it's all about willpower. I needed strength and willpower to get out of this. And I'm afraid that all the eyes are going to see this. That was pretty interesting foreshadowing. And so I didn't finish it or whatever. I should turn to him. The second part is like a hookup journal, sort of a thing that I started doing in 1994. Because I was trying to like make a code so if someone saw it, they wouldn't know what I was talking about. But like, I was talking about things or trying to write about things, but like I just couldn't bring myself to go all that way in a talk like this. But notice I said physical, and I'm like the word choices that I used. I physically interacted with the graduate assistant. I could have said we hooked up. So yeah, and that's something that we've talked about with the book and how, yeah, like is this going to be R-rated, an R-rated book? But there is that comes with it. You're exactly right.
I just suggest though, it's not about hooking up. It's about desire. And what are you looking for?
The pleasure and desire.
What will make you whole? You know, in terms of your queer or gay identity. It's too easy in a way in our culture to talk about hooking up without it being personal. And I find this with a lot of young people. It's real easy to talk about sex, but I'm more interested in how that is really integrated into the whole person and the humanity and the erotic desire. And I do want to know about your friend that you had to back away from when you went to see him. You told him you were gay?
No. You mean Andrew?
Andrew.
No, I said I just avoided him until he came to me, and then I just said, people are talking. I don't want to see you anymore.
10 years later when you
Oh,
visited him.
yeah. Well, we didn't, because we never messed around or anything. And so we had like a 5-hour conversation, what's going on. But it probably didn't get with intimate details, but we had a lot to talk about. That's for sure.
That's unfinished business with your best friend. I'm not talking about sexual. I'm just talking about unfinished business with your best friend.
It was a beautiful portion of your talk, the stuff about Andrew.
And, we're both singing show tunes, and, I always thought about him, and that, he's probably gay. When I first met him, I was like, this dude is gay. And then after a while, he grew on me, and I was like, okay, I don't even think about this anymore. Let's just whatever. And we just hung out, and we're sarcastic together and all that sort of stuff. But it's an amazing story. I have a couple of these interactions with people who belong or will be belonging with this VJ Unity thing. It's just crazy. It boggles my mind about the interconnectivity. Okay, well, I think we've reached a point. So thank you all for coming out. I really do appreciate this.
Do you have one of the handouts?
I ran out, but I can email it to you.
Can I write your email down?
Yeah. I'll just put it up.
Thanks for sharing. It's very educational.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
I'm Matt. How's it going?
Nice to
I'm
meet you.
not a Christian, but I'm working on a film with a Bob Jones alum who
Really
transitioned to a woman for 7 years, lost his family, and then just transitioned back to a man, and is now back in it, sort of. I'm Jewish. I'm not even in this world. So
I'm just trying to follow the story. I think that's really interesting.
went to Bob Jones, flunked out because he couldn't learn Greek and Hebrew, he said, and then in light of his failure, picked a random wife. They were married 25 years, didn't work, started living as a woman, that didn't work.
So now he's back.
Now he's, no.
Okay.
He's back alone, but he's back Bible believing, preaching to homeless people and on the street. So that was my questions were about faith and
totally understandable.
Sort of